Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, again, wherever you are joining us, whether you're in your kitchen, you're making dinner, whether you are relaxing for the weekend, or driving in your car and you're just listening to us for that half-hour drive, we want to say welcome. Thank you for supporting what we're doing, and please share those views. Right. Send those YouTube links out to friends. Let them know we're going through Genesis, and it's so good, right? Share that with people, and as always, consider supporting what we do, and we'll give you some links below to do that. So, again, we are moving through the book of Genesis, and so I'm getting lots of really interesting questions coming up. Before we step into Genesis chapter 11, I want to take one more question today, and I thought this was a good one. In fact, I think it's kind of fitting for what we're going to discuss today. So here was the question that one of you asked. And again, I thought it was a fantastic question. The question was, why didn't the Jews continue to write more, basically more letters, more books after Revelation? Good question, right? So first off, let me say this. When you review the books of the New Testament, we oftentimes think that, oh, it starts with, Matthew, it ends with Genesis. Or, sorry, Matthew ends with Revelation. And of course, we assume things that, this is because it's chronological order or this is how it was written. The reality is, Revelation would not have been the last. It's simply how they put the books together, how they ordered them. And so, truthfully, when you look at the New Testament, the Old Testament, it has more to do with the narrative and how the narrative fits than it does actual date setting. So, first off, important to know, right? Secondly, why didn't they continue writing? Well, a couple perspectives. One of them is this, and many different historians and theologians will say this. For the Jews, many will say, well, they stopped writing after the Old Testament, right? They stopped compiling. The New Testament is more of this early Christian Gentile movement, right? So many of them will say, they don't really take that as authorship, anyways, right? So that's one perspective. Another perspective is that, again, the New Testament, this is where they essentially they're in the grips of Roman Empire, right? And so after Roman Empire, what you have is there's a huge movement with rabbinical study. Now, in that movement of rabbinical study, looking back, looking at the New Testament, the Old Testament, what you have in that era, again, that 1,000 years or so after Roman rule, is Judaism begins to be very unpopular at certain eras, right? And so you don't see the Jewish people writing and compiling as much. They are simply in this place of trying to hold on to their story, right? Again, they find themselves in captivity. They are being persecuted, and so that would be another response to this question that writing their narrative, continuing writing the narrative, would have been difficult because they were facing so much persecution, so much violence. And then one other perspective I might want to share with you is this one, and it's meant a great deal to me. And we'll get into this today. But with the narrative, the picture of Jesus, right? Jesus is, for many people, the picture of the divine. For many of the Jews writing this, it was the picture of what Israel looked like. A new way to be human, right? So many different perspectives, and so many people will say Jesus kind of encapsulates the whole thing, right? Jesus is Torah, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is Israel, right? Jesus looks like what God would look like, right? God is acting, right, in the person of Jesus. We see this over and over again. So again, all of that to say, the reason we don't see them continue on fourfold, right? But I would say one of my most favorite responses again is that Jesus essentially encapsulates the whole picture of Israel, the divine, how we interact with the divine, how we respond to anger, hate, injustice. Yeah, it's beautiful. I think that in the Old Testament and New Testament, that gives us plenty for eternity, right? To continue asking, delving into. It's why we can look at the book of Genesis, and 3 years from now, we can look at it again and we'll find even deeper meaning. It's what the rabbis do, right? They study and they study and they find new, deeper, rich meanings. So, great question. I hope that kind of answered it. I gave you a lot of different perspectives to consider. So, today, again, we step into the book of Genesis, right? The origin book. And again, it's so important to remember the Jews, their response to captivity, their response to Babylonian exile is to compile all these stories, all these concepts that they would share around the fire, their identity. They encapsulate that all into Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. 587 BC, they're in Babylon. They're saying, we will not assimilate, right? So they compile the stories, not to make a perfect timeline, not to give a historically perfectly accurate account, never the intention, right? Torah, that beautiful scroll that the rabbis would, whenever they would come out on Shabbat, they'd bring the scroll out and children would rejoice, right? They'd want to touch the hem of the rabbi's garment. It's such a beautiful moment. They would sing as they saw these scrolls open because they knew they were about to experience life again. They were about to hear the stories of their identity, who they are, who they aren't. And so Torah, again, was poetry, song, it was mythology, it was prophetic musings, it was warnings, it was all of those things. And so, as we continue saying over and over again, Torah is the complete narrative of Israel miniaturized through its tellings. So, every time we read a story in Torah, we know this is a deeper story about not just the Jewish nation, but about humanity, about our own cycles that we continue to move through. And we can look at that as a nation. We can take it very interpersonal. We can look at it in so many different perspectives, but it's the story of humanity. And I would argue that's why we, as people who are not Jews, can pick this beautiful compilation up and say, man, this says a lot about humanity, about the divine, about community, so much, right? It's beautiful. And so today we're going to delve into the rest of chapter 11. Last week we talked about the beginning. Now we're going to step all the way through chapter 11. And so again, we've discussed Noah. We've discussed who he was. Now we've kind of moved past that. We've looked at Babylon, right? The origins of Israel's enemies, right? Some of the origins of some of their messianic archetypes. And so now in Genesis 11, 10 through 32, what I'd love for you to do today is I'd like you to open up your Bible and just read through some of these names. Read through these names because what you'll find is it sounds extremely boring, right? It has the potential to sound very boring when you read these because for most of us, we don't know these names, right? But if you are a Jewish individual, these were the names, right? These were the individuals who kind of encapsulated everything Israel is. That's our word today, right? Encapsulate. But it kind of sums up Israel. Everywhere you have these main figures showing up. And so what the rest of this chapter really is it's once again another bridge. Like we discussed the other day. It's a bridge. So these verses, again, much like those chapters we discussed, they are like the foundation. Again, they move the story from Noah to the next messianic archetype of Abraham. That's the purpose. It's going to give a foundation, right, for these stories to sit on. That's the idea here. It's very Hebraic, this writing style. They create the foundation, and then they go back and they begin to fill that bridge with all the stories and the characters and the moments and the cycles and the warnings. They fill it all. And so these bridges, essentially, they're the stories, right? It's much like the hero's story. It's the hero's journey. We've talked about this before, and I'm going to delve into it today. Very much borrowed from Jewish culture. And so I know many of you have heard of Joseph Campbell. And so if you look at the slide, Joseph Campbell is one of the great authors. He's one of the great teachers about literature. And so Joseph Campbell, what he did is fantastic. He essentially created something called the hero's journey. And so the hero's journey is a concept that's found most often, and you may not know this, historically in Israel's narratives. And Joseph Campbell himself, he says this, here's a quote: "Almost every story in the Torah is ripe with this heroic cycle of leaving home and finding it in the heart of God and man." And so when Joseph Campbell, when he's looking at all these different pieces of literature from all over the world, what he found was this story, the biblical story, the story of these Jewish people, these Hebrew people. he found that over and over again, their stories were some of the richest, most profound stories, and they all had an element of this cycle of leaving home, leaving captivity, moving through the journey, the trials, the triumphs, right? Overcoming it and then finding your way back home. This is something we see over and over and over again. And he recognized, and again, he read the book of Genesis. And so he recognized that all throughout this book, you will see this journey. This whole journey will unfold. And so I want to show you right here. We're just going to look at this together. First part, when you look at this, look at the slide here. Take a look at that. The call to action, the assistance, this movement towards leaving home, calling out. This is the first moment for Israel. And when you read the stories in the Torah of the nation of Israel, what you'll find is over and over again, they find themselves in captivity. And usually that's where the story is going to start, right? They find themselves in this place where they begin calling out. Right? They're calling out. They're desiring to leave a static place. And it could be okay. It could be not okay. But either way, they begin to realize they need to step away. So there's no longer growth. There's stagnation, right? And again, it goes for our own journeys too. Think about your own spiritual journey. We've looked at Israel's, but think about your own, right? When are those moments in your life when you've been stuck? You felt stagnant. You're not moving. This could even be you've been stuck in a cycle and it just feels like, I'm still in this rotten relationship. I'm still at this place working for a job I hate. You're stuck. You're in captivity, right? You are in Egypt. You're in Babylon. Yeah, you're in Assyria. You are under Roman rule. I think you get the point. But at one point, every point in Israel's journey, you'll see over and over again, they will do one thing. They will begin crying out. And the cry of the Hebrew is a beautiful cry. It's this cry out saying, I don't belong here. Think about that. It's beautiful. I don't belong here. That's what the Hebrew concept of crying out literally meant. I don't belong here. I belong with the divine. I belong in wholeness, not in captivity. I don't belong here. Again, think about your own journey. If you're finding yourself in a relationship that's destructive, you don't belong there. If you find yourself at a dead-end job, you hate your job, your boss is just terribly mean, you probably don't belong there. The community you're in is just so destructive, you don't belong there. Israel cries out, they say, we don't belong here. Beautiful. The next moment for Israel, it's always there's a departure, right? After the cry, after this deep desire to step away from the thing that's not working, right? The thing that's bringing death, brokenness, decay. There's a moment where Israel finally, they step away, right? In this tribulation, there's a lot of struggle to get out of that, right? To get out of the muck and the mire, there's struggle. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be there's going to be some water you're going to have to cross, right? You're going to have some faith, right? To step away from the thing. Understand it's going to be okay. There's going to be another job, right? I'm going to make it through without this person. Things are going to be okay. And so you step out in faith, knowing you don't belong there. You belong somewhere else, and the divine's going to walk with you through it. Yeah, and that's the moment where Moses, Joshua, right? Elijah, Elisha, they part the waters. Yeah, they part the waters. We don't belong there. And there's this moment of departure, and there's always something miraculous in the departure. And I think all of us know this. When we have stepped away from something that we didn't fit anymore, when we stepped away from those things that were causing us pain, right? Or maybe we were causing others pain, who knows? But we stepped away, it didn't fit. We stepped away, it wasn't easy. We realized we don't belong there. And we stepped away, and there was something we would say that happened there that was miraculous. There were so many little, beautiful, miraculous steps that led you through that water, right? Out of slavery, out of captivity. And it was beautiful. And so for Israel, there's a moment where they leave captivity, there's a departure. And you will find this over and over again in every big, big narrative in Israel's story in the Torah. The next portion, what you'll find here is after leaving, they're going to face trials. They're going to face obstacles, right? And so for Israel, 40 days of wandering, right? For Israel, there's the stories of Joseph and the colored coat, right? The dream color coat. You have this great coat that he's again given, and then his brothers, they throw him in the pit, and he goes through all of this crazy wandering and brokenness, right? But he gets through it, and he unlearns certain things only to learn new things. And at the end, he finds himself at a place of a blessing, right? Israel goes through this over and over again as a nation. And I would argue for us as well, we experience this too. After we step out, whew, that was scary, right? We stepped out, but now it's not easy, right? We had this idea that it was going to be so easy when you stepped away from the thing that didn't work. The relationship, the job, whatever it was, you stepped away, you thought it'd be easy, but man, has it been hard. It's not going to things just don't always fall into place. Usually they don't, most of the time. And so there's difficulty. You're having to take some responsibility now, right? Maybe you've hurt other people and you've had to apologize. You've had to make things right. And you've slowly had to learn and unlearn certain things, break certain habits, start new ones. This is the time. This is where we again go through the trials, because it's only in the trials and the disruptions that we grow, right? If you just stayed at home, if you just stayed in Egypt, if you just stayed in Babylon, there would be absolutely no growth. But the hero's journey, Israel's journey, is one of growth, change, right? It's an evolutionary process where you grow and change and shift and you become a better and better human being. It's beautiful. So there must be trials. There must be moments of difficulty. The next part that he brings up, and again, this is deeply connected to Israel, right? He makes so many references to the Bible here, which I think is so beautiful. He says in Israel's journey over and over again, after you go through the trials, after you go through the learning, the unlearning, after you've gone through these things, that's when Joshua, right? He parts the water with his people, and they finally get to the promised land, right? He finally gets to the promised land. He leads his people away. Finally, they get there. It's so good. You've got Joshua, you've got Moses, you've got so many different messianic figures. Abraham will do the same. Noah does the same. All of these individuals, they lead their people out, right? You have Joseph, who leads his people out of famine, right, into plenty, even in the midst of a famine. Yeah, over and over again, they lead their people to a place where there's treasure, the result of the return, the moment Israel finally steps into the promise. They finally are aware, God has been with us the entire time. And then finally, this happens over and over again in the story. What you'll see, because we're all human, right? We all shift, we all move, and we all find ourselves at one point right back in another place, right? We will find ourselves in struggle, in pain. It's the story, right? It's the story. And sometimes we find ourselves back home, and home never changed, right? Sometimes you're able to go back to the thing, but now it's not that the thing changed, it's that you changed. For some of us, when you go back, it's different, isn't it? You can step, some of us who have gone through some really difficult times, church was so painful, right? We couldn't step into a church again because there was so much baggage, so much pain. But after you as a person have gone through the shifts and the changes, finally you can step back into a church and say, well, I may not agree with everything up there, but you know what? I am whole. I am connected. I feel good. I have gone through the journey. The journey was really for me, not for them, for me, not for that system, for me. I have changed. So good. And so when you look at each one of these stories, consider this for a moment. Adam and Eve, we talked about this, right? Early on in our study in Genesis, Adam and Eve, they have this moment, right? Deep in the story, they leave home, right? They leave home, they move away from Eden, right? It's the beginning point of a really messy, messy journey. It's the hero's journey, right? This is what happens for them over and over again. Think about this. After Adam and Eve, we have these three sons that show up on the narrative, right? First, we have Cain and Abel, right? We have the way of Cain, which is kind of the curse, right? Finding my identity, not from the divine, right? But from what I do, right? It's a posturing against the divine. And so which cycle do we follow, right? We end up with the first murder, Abel. We step away from Eden. But then we have Seth, right? New life comes out of brokenness. New cycles are begun. Israel continues to follow in a new path, right? This cycle over and over again. You'll see it, the hero's journey. Again, Noah, we spent a lot of time with Noah. Think about the story of Noah. It's the story of Israel, and it's so good. Again, he steps away from home. He gets into this boat. He has to put complete trust in the divine that wherever they're going, right? It has less to do with how Noah navigates the boat. It's more about the trust that he has in the divine that they're going to move through this and they will touch land again, right? Life will be preserved. He doesn't know where he's going. It's a wild journey, right? It's terrifying, but he steps away and he goes on this journey, and finally they get to a place of wholeness, home where they begin anew. So good. And then we're going to have the individual of Abraham. He's coming up in our story, right? Abraham is next, chapter 12. Abraham is going to be the next messianic figure. Abraham is going to be a reminder, just like the other messianic figures that we've seen so far, right? Noah, Abraham, we're going to see Joshua. Again, Jesus' name, Yeshua, right? You see the connections. Messianic characters, messianic archetypes. Here's the thing. Every messianic archetype, if you are a Hebrew, if you are a serious study of Torah, right? If you've studied Torah seriously, taken it seriously, if you've studied it, then you will see over and over again the idea behind a messianic archetype is always for one purpose. And here was the purpose. It seems so simple, but it's so heavy. The idea behind the reason one would write a messianic archetype into the story was always this. It was always to say, God is with us. When Abraham shows up on the narrative, a Hebrew reads, "Ah, God is with us." Beautiful. When Noah steps into the scene, there's chaos, there's brokenness, there's coming a flood. Noah, God is with us. God is with us. It's the whole idea, the essence of the Messiah is the breath, the God is with us. It's going to be okay. God is here. God is with us. The boat is going to float. Life is going to sustain. Even though this terrible moment happened, right? Abel's been murdered. Seth, God is with us. Yeah, Abraham leaves home terrified. It's a new journey. They've said, we don't believe in those other gods. We think there is one. And he steps away from home. And his people say, God is with us. One of my favorite verses from Deuteronomy says this: be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. They're referring to their enemies, their captors. For the Lord your God goes with you. The Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. If you've ever read Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, you'll see this is a direct reference to Deuteronomy 31:6. He'll never leave you nor forsake you. So understand this. Each messianic archetype that shows up, whether you take it literally, metaphorically, whatever, just know this. They're there to remind Israel, God is with us. God has not left us. People ask me over and over again, why are you so drawn to Jesus? Why are you so drawn to Jesus? And my stories, I've been all over the place, learning, changing, moving, evolving as a person, how I view different elements of Torah. The reason I'm so drawn to Jesus is because I see in Jesus this pinnacle messianic figure, this messianic archetype person, divine. I see it in Jesus. I am so drawn to Jesus because Jesus, in my opinion, is the strongest archetype of the message God is with us. God is with us. Every story, parable, miracle that he does, God is with us. And so Jesus is the final say in this discussion of where God is in our pain, right? Here on the cross, we see suffering, brokenness. Where's God in your pain? Right there suffering alongside you. It's the moment where you're struggling and you're broken and the friend says, "Yeah, me too. Me too. You're going through something? Yeah, I've been there too. You can't figure out how to parent. It's driving you to feel crazy. You feel like you're failing. Me too. You feel like the world's turned upside down. You feel like you've tried over and over and over again and you keep failing. Me too." Jesus is the most beautiful picture, and again, my opinion. God is with us. Me too. Me too. It's also an image of Israel. It's Israel. When you cry out, Israel, when you cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Right? Psalm 22, one of the most quoted verses during the Passover for Israel. My God, why have you forsaken me? Where are you in all of my pain? And the response, the answer in Torah, as well as the answer over and over again in the Jesus narrative in the New Testament, is this: Sunday morning, it's coming. Sometimes it takes us a while to get to Sunday, but resurrection, new life is just around the corner. God has not left you, not forsaken you, but walking with you. Sometimes, most of the time, we're not even aware of it. But it's those Sunday mornings, those resurrection, new life experiences where we, like the Israelites, we walked along that bridge, right? We walked along that bridge, and finally, when you're on the other side and you turn, you notice all the different characters that led you to this point. All the different little stories and problems and trials you faced. You turn around, you see them in hindsight, and you realize God was with us the entire time. We just weren't aware of it, right? Story of Moses, when he goes up onto Mount Sinai. The Jews believe that you cannot look at the divine, right? So this idea that God passes before Moses. For them, they have a tradition, the Jews, the people who actually wrote this piece, right? They said, Moses, he feels the divine pass behind him, and he turns, and he can only see where the divine has been, right? The reminder that through it all, through all the pain, the brokenness, God has been with him the whole time. He just wasn't aware of it. The burning bush has been burning the whole time, Moses. You've been there the whole time. You just weren't aware of it until now. God was with us the whole time. And so I thought about what would the takeaway be today? What can we do for the takeaway? And I thought we'd do something different today. I thought we'd do something a little different. I want you to think about your own journey. Think about the bridge that you've been crossing. All those moments, pain, brokenness, some of those really difficult moments. I want you to draw them up right now in your mind. Those moments where you just said, man, where are you, God? You're crying out. Where are you? Things are falling apart. Where are you? I want you to take a moment and just think about those for a second. And maybe you're in the middle of it. I don't know. But draw some of those up for a moment. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to just close your eyes And I'm just going to say this phrase a couple times to you. I'm going to say it until it finally connects for you. Because today I think maybe some of us need to hear it. Some of us need to be reminded of Jesus. Some of us need to be reminded of the stories of Abraham, Noah, Joshua. Close your eyes for a moment. Rest in the truth of these words. God has never left you. God has never left you. He's been there the entire time. God has not left you. He has not forsaken you. He's been there the entire time. And maybe you're in the middle of it right now. Maybe you're in the middle of the bridge. And yeah, turning around, it's going to be scary. Keep pushing forward, right? Resurrection Sunday is just around the corner. Keep pushing forward. God has not left you. He's not forsaken you. He's right there with you. And soon, very soon, you're going to turn around and you're going to realize this whole journey was leading somewhere, to this promised land, this fulfilled promise, this new job, this new connection, whatever the thing is. And you're going to be so happy that you left that place, you started walking across that bridge. You're going to be so happy to the place where it has led you. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. Moving through this book of Genesis has been so powerful. We're going to step into chapter 12 next week. So today, let me remind you again, ethos-church.org/donate. Please consider working with us. Continue to support what we do. We think these videos, these books in the Bible, they're so good and worth taking time to study. So please consider donating that tax-deductible donation today. And as always, we continue doing online connections and discussions. So much fun through our Ethos living rooms. And as always, hit that subscribe button. This year, we are going to grow our YouTube channel. We're going to start slow this year, but we're going to make this thing blow up. So let's continue sharing it to everyone we know. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. God is with you, right? I am, he says, I am there. I've been there the whole time. Everyone, take care. We'll see you next week.